All right, and as mentioned earlier on, tonight we ask a very simple question about the police. And while it is a service, the question is it a force or a service? Quite rhetorical, but this emanates from the concerns that we've had over the years, over time, and especially with the numerous police reforms that have been conducted in the country. I mean, with the hope that this then will change the service, or the police service, or the National Police Service, as well as, just bring in some confidence from the people. And of course, we'll be getting to that conversation alongside George Musamali, who's a security expert. We also have Tatyana Njenga, who's a program assistant and legal affairs and access at the Justice at KHRC. And we also have Emmanuel Langat, Deputy Director, Investigations and Forensic Services, IPOA. We'll be introducing them even better later on. But at this very point, I want us to look at some of the changes that we've witnessed over the years in relation to reforms of the police. That is, of course, looking at the numerous task forces that have been set on board to come up with these changes and whether they have yielded any form of fruit. And so, of course, we begin with a review of police reforms that is on the question of the task forces and the leads as to these task forces. And over the years, the different years, of course, we've had one conducted by a team led by John Mutoni, that is from 2002 all the way to 2003. And of course, we come to this one by Philip. Of course, we'll be looking at that. Yes, Philip Ransley, that is around 2009. Titus Naikuni, that is 2010 all the way to 2012. And of course, these are the task forces. We get to a different matter. That is on the committees that, served under the task force, where the legal and policy beat, of course, the welfare terms and conditions, equally technical and operational capabilities, as well as the management committee under that. What, of course, we have the mandate that was accorded to the numerous task forces. That is on the question of to investigate the institutional challenges and as well as hampering security services, National Police Service, within the National Police Services. Actually, this is what was supposed to be done. That is to address the challenges of hampering security services, National Police Service, or under the National Police Service, and equally the Kenya Prisons Service, as well as the National Youth Service, NYS, and the question on the review of the welfare and the terms and conditions of the service, that is for the members of the three services mentioned above. Yes, and at this very point, we talk of the composition of the National Police Service, and we talk of the Kenya Police Service, the Administration Police Service, the DCI, as well as the Internal Affairs Unit. Remember, this is just to give you an overview of what the police service looks like and basically the mandate accorded to them and the numerous reforms that have been done over time. And so findings by the task force and the challenges, or perhaps this then would be the challenges that the numerous task forces, presented. Of course, the main one being underfunding, the question of corruption, the question of leadership, as well as poor handling of human capital. All right, underneath the recommendations that were given as to underfunding, the task force urged the government to adequately fund the NPS. Recommendations on the question of corruption, the restructuring of the current traffic police unit into a new traffic management unit that is well trained. And they also talked about the amendment of Section 65 of the National Police Service Act within 6 months, and as well abolition of police roadblocks and their replacement with mobile patrol units. This largely that is on traffic police. And yes, recommendations on the question of leadership that were accorded by the task force is that fresh vetting by an independent panel for all officers of the rank of Senior Superintendent of Police, that is SSP and above. As well, they recommended minimum qualifications for recruitment into the service should be raised to grade C minus, that is in KCSE, as well as for marginalized areas. A task force recommendations or recommends the retention of grade D plus when there are no applicants with grade C minus in KCSE. Recommendations on leadership still, amendment of Regulation 9(1) of the NPSC, that is transfer and deployment, and regulations to limit operational deployments to a period not exceeding 6 months. As well, another recommendation is that no person should serve in one county for a period of more than 3 years, save for those deployed, that is, to the specialized units. Still on that, establishment of grades of Inspector 2 and 1, or this, of course, this particular grades or the particular rankings, and the introduction of Constable 3, 2, and 1, and Corporal 1, 3, 2, and 1 within the same ranks. Of course, Musawali will tell us some more as to whether that is how they are supposed to be named. And of course, the police wing being restored, that is the air wing, be restored to the inclusive control of NPS forthwith. And there are numerous recommendations you will agree with us. That is on the question of underfunding, government to adequately fund the KPS to modernize its facilities, tooling, equipment, and gear, as well as enhance its logistical as well as technological capabilities. Equally, a recommendation of providing a decent housing for its officers. And when it comes to the Kenya Prison Service, there are a couple of recommendations as to the leadership, where fresh vetting by an independent panel for all officers of the rank of Senior Superintendent of Prisons, SSP, and above was recommended, as well, save for the current CGP within 6 months of publication of this very report, and as well restructuring of the Prisons Council. And still on the prison services, on the question of leadership, the Prisons Council to be appointed or should urgently develop a housing policy, as well as the entry requirement into the service should be capped at a minimum of grade C-, except for candidates that is from marginalized areas. And the initial training for cadets should take not less than about 15 months, while the one for constables should not be less than 12 months. And on the National Youth Service, the NYS, they are recommending, or they recommended that the NYS recruits should be held as a minimum of KCSE certificate, and that the NYS officers be recruited from among ex-servicemen or women, and of course establishment of the grades of Inspector 2 and 1, and the introduction of Constable 3, 2, and 1, that is on the rankings, as well as Corporal 1, 3, 2, and 1 within the same ranks. Is that the way they say it? Yes. Ranking 1, 2, 3, okay.
These are new things.
All right, and of course recommendations on leadership. The current medical scheme for the officers of NYS be expanded, that is to include the servicemen and women. As well, NYS should be domiciled in the Ministry of Interior for better coordination. Still on the same, and on the question of underfunding, be granted seed funding to undertake income-generating projects. Recommendations on corruption, as well, recommendations on corruption. They say that members of the council should be citizens of Kenya, hold degrees from universities recognized in Kenya, and of course, on the question of recommendation as to leadership and so much more. I think this is the much that we prepared for now, but this is just to paint a picture of the many recommendations that continue to be leveled, that is on the side of the National Police Service. And we just ask ourselves tonight whether then they come in handy to make sure that we have a better police service, and then the public as well will get to enjoy the best and the most of this as to the question of ensuring security in the country. Let's listen in to what the former CJ, that is David Maraga, has to say. And remember also, he has led a team in relation to pushing some more on the question of the reforms and the police reforms right here in the country, and then we get to the discussion after that.
I thank Mr. Justice retired David Maraga and all the members of the task force for a thorough, meticulous, compiled, and clearly written report which effectively articulate the necessity and urgency of transformative changes to our national policing and other security services. Your contribution to our transformative agenda is appreciated, Mr. Chairman, and your team and your place in Kenya's history of positive change is assured. You can count on me and this administration to be meticulous and as thorough in implementing these recommendations.
One of the remarkable recommendations that came from both the field and the members of three services is that this time round, the recommendations of the task force will be implemented. There have been similar issues have come up in the previous task forces, and they have not been recommended, but they trust that this time round, Your Excellency, with the commitment that you have given yourself, don't have any doubt whatsoever that the recommendations will be implemented.
All right, folks, I think the issue that we want to discuss tonight is very clear. I would like to reintroduce our guests to us so we can begin the conversation. And now, people at home, this is your opportunity to send in your questions, your views and reviews on this subject through the SMS line, which is on your screen right now. Our producers will also put up the WhatsApp number, which comes directly here. And we'll be able to hear your questions and maybe even channel them to our guests tonight. And to the very guests we're talking about, starting with Mr. George Musamali. You wear many hats. I think the simplest of those hats is security expert.
Sure.
Thank you very much for coming. Next, we have Madam Tatyana Njenga, who's a program assistant in legal affairs and access regarding legal affairs and access to justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Karibu sana. Awesome. And last but not least is Mr. Emmanuel Lagat, who's the Deputy Director for Investigations and Forensic Services at IPOA. Karibu sana.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen and lady, the issue of police reform in Kenya, clearly from the history we've just seen, is one that has had a lot of different approaches. I want to just ask a simple question. What is fundamentally wrong with how we're doing policing in Kenya? Let's start with you, George.
Victor, here we are talking about a very old patient. In fact, the three are very old patients. If you look at the police service, it's more than 120 years old. We established the police in 1906. And that time it was under what we called the East African British Company. So we had not yet moved into a protectorate.
The Imperial East African
Yes, that is
British Company,
1906. If you look at the prison services, equally, it's as old as the police service. And then the youngest of the three siblings is the NOIS that was established in 1963 after independence. And now that we are talking about the problems bedeviling the three, it clearly tells us that, yes, we know there has been a problem. We have a problem. We have sick patients and we need to look for a way of treating their illness. And we've tried several interventions. We've talked about the Mtonyi task force. We've talked about the Naikuni task force. We are forgetting that even before these task forces, we had commissions. So a task force is like you're going to see a clinical officer. And then we say, this is serious. We need a doctor. Who was the doctor? Ramsley Commission. We had the Waki Commission. And they all came up with recommendations. And the issue that has always been the problem here is the relationship between the public and the police. Why are we not getting services? Why don't we have a customer-client relationship between the uniformed service and the public that they're supposed to serve? And I think this is why that brings out the reason we've had all these interventions, trying to bridge this gap so that at the end of the day, the public will feel that the police, the prison services, and the NYS are here for the good of the nation, not as it is right now, where every other time you hear we have mandamano, people talk about excessive force. Somebody goes to prison for correction, he comes out worse than he went in because of the way he's treated there. We have an NYS that had its mandate when it was established by General China. He was the first Director General. And then along the way, we lost track. And then we started using the NYS in other things that are not supposed to be done by them. And I think this is why now we are coming up with all these recommendations, these interventions, to see if we can correct what has been bedeviling us for quite some time.
Mistakes.
I'm curious. I'm curious. Do you suppose that with all these reforms that are introduced, then the most pressing concerns are addressed? And what would they be currently, such that we now still talk about, the police service to be a patient, for lack of a better word, a patient that has been here for the longest of time without getting any form of medication?
Yeah, you see, the question was a force or a service. So why was it a force? And when did it change into a service?
And is there anything that changed?
And is there anything that changed? I think that is the cardinal question that we need to answer here.
Okay.
And remember, this came about after the Kriegler Commission, after the 2008 tribal clashes, and then we realized post-election violence, we realized there must be something the police did that was wrong.
Okay.
And we said, now we need the Kriegler Commission sat down and say, we have Agenda 4. Agenda 4 was to reform the police. And I think they contributed a lot to what was happening politically then. And then to correct this is when we came up with Agenda 4, and we said we need reforms in the police service so that this force, because it was a Kenya police force, and then we changed the name into a service. And we did not only change the police, because initially we used to have the Kenya Army. And we said, no, the Kenya Army Force is not for the people. Let's make it the KDF, Kenya Defense Forces, to serve the people. So I think the most pressing issue that needs to be worked on, and several interventions have been put in place. One is the relationship between the public and the police. That is number one. For me, number two is the human capital within the police services, the utilization of the police officers when it comes to performing their duties, the prison services officers, and the NYS officers. Number three, the welfare of these officers. I think those are crucial.
I want us to actually, we'll come back and go deeper into these issues. Let's hear from you, Tatyana. Where do you stand on this? What's the fundamental challenge or problem with the police, as it were, right now?
I'd say that as we look at things from an outside perspective, things are viewed from systemic issues. It's stemming from systemic issues in the sense that you can say that the theory is there, the legal provisions are there. Yes, we have the NPS Act 2011, we have the Constitution, we have the relevant laws that have been brought up, that the recommendations from various reports, Maraga, Kriegler, Waki Commission, amongst others, have been put in place. They've been raised, but they've not been put in place. So the issue would be implementation, in my view. So why do we have all these issues coming up, being brought up by public, being brought up by systemic issues, challenges, and they're not being addressed? It's because of the issue of implementation. If we have the things written down, fine. Where is the translation getting lost? Because in theory, we've moved from a force to a service. But if you look at the action, we've not actually translated it. Qua ground, exactly. We're not seeing it being implemented by the actual service, the National Police Service. So I'd say the issue really ties down to implementation.
All right.
And also, as George, as George has shared as well, I think we have a misunderstanding or lack of awareness when it comes to the public aspect. Yeah, they don't know what they can stand for. They don't understand where their rights come in. So by the time they're being mistreated by these agents from the National Police Service, they don't know when to speak up. So the translation or lack of awareness also comes in to play a big role in the issues that are coming up.
All right. Mr. Lagat, what are your views on this?
Yeah, thank you. I must say that the reform agenda, as said earlier, has been long. You realize that the 2010 Constitution actually converted the Kenya Police Force into the National Police Service. So that is the legal aspect which created the National Police Service under Article 239 and 243 of the Constitution. Now, is it then a service or a force? As Samali had put it, that this is an old institution, over 120 years. Now, it has developed culture over that period. And any institution that has a culture will not be easy to change that culture. And that is why the reform process is given a time frame so that several things are being adjusted 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, the following day, as you monitor the progress of that change of culture. Unfortunately, some members of the National Police Service still live in the past. And they do offer resistance to these reforms. They would easily say, I think previously that in that manner it was okay, but it is not okay. Now, what is it that is not adding up until we find that it would appear that the reform agenda to the National Police Service is not working? It is working, but there are just a few things that needs to be panel beat. If we can change the attitude and the manner in which members of the National Police Service respond to issues, then it will become so easy. For example, in a case where a demonstration is happening, ordinarily you expect a police officer to go and then look at the ground, learn, and in the best interest of justice say, this is how I'm going to deal with the case. Sometimes it's just because of bad decision making that we see. And then I find that a lot of force is used, and then it beats logic where people are saying, are we really reformed?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We'll come back to delve into some of the issues that all of you have raised now in a little bit more detail. But first, let's get these messages. And folks at home, please send in your questions. Please send in your experiences and your suggestions on what we can do about this subject matter. Once again, the SMS line is on your screen, and the WhatsApp number will be on your screen for the entirety of this conversation. We'll be right back.